Hello in TV land. It is I, Shredlord, and I am here with my good friend,
Necrotic Nick,
to bring you yet another fabulous album review. And if you haven't heard 96 Bitter Beings, Synergy Restored, then you have not heard the latest offering from these fine gentlemen.
That was a positively stunning intro. You have done so well, Shred.
Thank you.
I commend thee. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled stupidity. This is an album I've been kind of wanting to go over just because this has an attachment to another band that I really liked named CKY.
For all you kids out there that are younger than us, CKY was a staple for all the kids that like to do dumb shit growing up, which was definitely us. You might know of these group of guys called Jackass. Well, Jackass is our generation. I'm very proud to claim Jackass. When we were kids, we got to see the dudes in CKY and Jackass make a bunch of crazy fucking skate videos and prank videos with what would turn into eventually the Jackass franchise. Now, like Necrotic and I were talking about, one of the cool things about CKY is we go, wait a minute, all these fucking dudes who are making these wild videos, there's a metal band that goes along with these cats? I'm in.
I remembered hearing the song 96 Quite Bitter Beings, which I initially thought this was actually called, but they just ditched the quite. And I was like, what the fuck? That is just a really interesting, wild-sounding song. And I just kind of became hooked on the band. I actually ended up getting all their albums. I really enjoyed, like, just their overall weird sound. It really stood out, like, from a lot of music, honestly. It kind of was one of those weird niche bands that just kind of were known for something very strange and different. Namely, it was their guitar style and their really unique melodies.
Yeah, and I think to this day, the opening and main riff of 96 Quite Bitter Beings is easily one of the most recognizable riffs in the genre. Like, people who have no idea of the band CKY have definitely heard that riff before and know it.
It stays rent-free in my fucking brain, as well as a lot of other songs by them. Now, the main guy behind this band is Deron Miller, who was one of the founding members of CKY. He ended up leaving in 2011 and ended up forming his own project. I believe there was one before this, I can't quite remember, but in 2016 he formed this band in LA. This is their second album overall and their first one to debut on Nuclear Blast Records. And yeah, I mean, it is essentially kind of going back to that CKY sound. Like, all the fundamental components of it are there. Again, the strange guitar style, which I think is like individual notes and really interesting tuning. Like, it's just something different that he does that I really don't think a lot of other bands do, that really kind of gives this band, and by extension CKY, sort of an original sound.
Yeah, you combine some of the interesting melodies and the disco beats that go along with them, like some of the syncopated stomps and stuff. This band definitely has some tropes that I dig, for sure.
It's definitely, again, like very similar to CKY. I would say more up-tempo. Like, right away, the opening track, Vaudevilles Revenge, which was their lead-off single, like, it kind of brings in the stomping riffs, but there's that sort of like almost power pop sensibility to the songwriting. Like, it's built around clever melodic hooks, interesting leads, and interesting like songwriting, just in terms of like how it kind of flows in and out. Like, there's metal sections, there's poppy sections, big vocal harmonies. And I don't know, like, that was the first song I heard and was like, ah, this sounds like CKY. I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I think I noticed on this album is there's no song really over the 4 or 5 minute mark. They're all pretty short. The other thing is this whole album as a vibe to me kind of feels like later on in Mastodon's career, when they would start throwing in those more softer, kind of not ballady per se, but the more chilled out vibe songs. I get that vibe a lot on here, whether it's the vocal melodies or even sometimes just the overall vibe of a verse or a chorus, which is not a bad thing at all, but it definitely recalls that in my mind.
There's a lot more, I would say, pop to this than there was with CKY. CKY felt like there was a little bit more variety. Like, you got some stuff that was maybe a little bit more stoner metal or sludge metal in there. I mean, overall, I guess you could call CKY metal or alternative metal. They're really just kind of hard to pigeonhole. It's like one of those bands like Primus or Helmet.
They just kind of do what they want.
Yeah, and the fans that flock to them. Like, there's a little bit of like Melvins-esque stuff to them too. But this one stays very major chordy. Like there's a lot of big power pop hooks. It was like someone, kind of combined the Melvins with Weezer and then threw in like 80s pop sort of lushness, especially on songs like Throw Yourself Inside. Lots of big 80s synths in there. The riffs are particularly catchy. Even the drums kind of change the sound to a more like 80s canned drum sound. It's really interesting. It's a very catchy, hooky song.
Yeah, this whole album, I feel like, was created with a sense of really delivering the strongest hooks and melodic offerings possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes to the point of possible exhaustion. The last tracks are a couple of good examples of the contrast. And what I mean by that is, the last song I felt, well, the last two songs I should say, I felt like they did a really good job of mixing more elements into the songs. Whereas opposed to some of the earlier tracks, just lean really heavily on the big hook and leave out some other elements, and then you're left with a decent short song, but it really only has a few ingredients in it.
It's kind of like a single. Like pretty much what you think about is like a radio single, like, like, all right, let's get good verse, good chorus, good verse, chorus, maybe a third verse. Maybe we just do a kind of a lead section and kind of bring in the last little hook of the chorus again. Like, it's very simplified in terms of like the song structure. Like, there's not a lot of different elements going on, but they're combined pretty effectively as in like a formula. And for the most part, formula is pretty solid. I do like it when they get like a few more metal moments, because a lot of this I would say is kind of poppy. Like, it kind of goes after the major chords, the happy chords. But songs like Bloodbath Mania and I would even say Adios Amigo, though it does have sort of a peppy step to it, there's some good metal riffs in there. Hell, Bloodbath Mania, when they break down the main riff on there, it kind of sounds like No One Like You off of Scorpions Blackout.
Yeah, there's a couple homages, if you will, and maybe they're purely coincidental, but definitely hear No One Like You. And then there's definitely a little moment in between the verses where it has kind of a short Celtic sounding lead, where to me it gives me a kind of a Thin Lizzy vibe.
Yeah. And I mean, all of it, like, I would say every single song in here has some sort of hook. It's just sometimes that hook doesn't last long, and that was kind of like an issue there with like condensing the songs down to shorter lengths, is there are moments in here where you feel like a certain melody should go on. Blood Rock Mania actually opens up with a really cool, like, clean melody. I think it's one of the catchiest melodies on there. It's really subdued, and it kind of builds up, and it gets into like the nice rockin' part, and the song's really cool. And while that clean melody does repeat towards the end, I just feel like that's one of those melodies that should hang out longer. And there's a lot of moments on here where there's a certain hook that comes up, like, oh, that's really cool, and they're kind of done with it.
Yeah, and I question if that was done because it was such a strong hook, it ends up leaving you wanting more, aka you kind of want to listen to it again. That's kind of a nice little earworm trick per se, but yeah, there's definitely some sections on this album that could have been extended. Hell, there's definitely sections on this album, even though they're short songs, that it could have been clipped. My opinion is after listening to this album as a whole, I mean, yeah, it's only 42 minutes long, but I got to be honest with you, they probably could still take maybe 1 to 3 songs out of here, put them as strong B-side considerations, and release this album again as a good 30-minute, stronger album.
Yeah, honestly, songs like Fire Skyline, it has like a cool riff to it, but I don't know, like, I feel like they wrote the cool riff and they didn't know what to do with it in terms of like melodies on top of it, mainly the vocal melodies, because the chorus is kind of a big miss for me. Like, it just doesn't match up.
It's very obscure. On the rest of the album, though, I thought he does an incredible job of creating melody, not just with the song itself, but with his vocal melodies, putting different and varied melodies on top of what's going on. I thought he did a great job of that.
Hey, he does match up well with the very interesting riffs, because again, like, it's that CKY riff style. It's kind of unique, and finding melodies to match up with that, I think, is probably a little bit difficult. I will say, though, that I think there is entirely too much processing on the vocals. The vocals on here are never natural. Like, they always sound like there's a filter on them, whether it's auto-tune, reverb, or constant layers, or like a phaser effect. There's always effects on. There's honestly probably more effects on the vocals than there are on the guitars sometimes. And the guitars have lots of cool, like, weird effects that pop in and out too. But being a longtime CKY fan, I know that Deron Miller liked to use different filters, but I think he didn't use them as much here, and there's also him pushing into a higher register in here where it just doesn't sound very natural. It sounds strained.
It definitely sounds like it's out of his comfort zone when it comes to certain higher parts, and then you harmonize it with what sounds like kind of everything getting kind of auto-tuned. Does it sound bad? No. Does it sound a little weird to the ear? Yes.
Yeah. And another issue I have with this is the fact that some songs just end. Like, there's really not like a big grand ending to any of them. They kind of end almost the same way where, as I brought up, like, all right, you had verse, chorus, lead break, kind of a bridge, and then you hear like the chorus again for another second or so. It just seems like that's like, just like, we'll just tag that in and that's just the end of it. There are some songs that just feel like there should be like a bit more of an outro. Like, I do like the fact that 90 Car Pileup actually has this, you know, little atmospheric intro with a car wreck, and you can actually hear like someone tuning a radio and you hear the melody come up, the clean melody, and it ends on that clean melody. But most of these songs just sort of start, kind of hang on to that mid-tempo sort of beat that's, I would say, kind of the main thing on here. There really isn't like a flat-out slower song or a flat-out faster song. It's kind of all that mid-tempo thing. And then the song just kind of ends on the chorus again, and it's really not that lavish. Like, there are some moments in here where it does step outside of that, but for the most part, it kind of just repeats that formula a lot. But when they do something different at the end, generally it's really good, like Conditional and Unconditional. The lead at the end of that is like this really cool, flashy 80s metal lead. It's really well done, very melodic. And I was like, wow, dude, why can we end on like that? That seems like a high note to end on a song.
Yeah, that was, like I made to the point earlier, you know, some of these variations that we get at the end of the songs could have really been nice injected into some of the earlier tracks. And speaking of the guitar work, it was very good. Not only from a riff standpoint, not only from a sound of guitar standpoint, but when we did get some leads in here like Conditional or Unconditional, let's see here, Blood Rock Mania, Throw Yourself Inside has a very good, strong. You can tell it was written, not improvised. You know, when I think of guitar solos, there's usually two schools of thought. You either just kind of let the tape play and just play how you feel, or you sit down with a piece and you really work on it to make sure you kind of say what you want to say within that section. And you can definitely tell these solos were kind of written out, I think, and they were very well executed, and the guitar tones sounded really good. If anything, hell, I could have used more of it, because when it was there, it added a great element to the tracks.
There's some really cool like harmonizing too when it comes down to guitar tracks. Like, there's just clever melodies, and that's just sort of the thing with like that CKY sort of sound. Like, there are melodies that you necessarily wouldn't think of as like big hooks, but they know how to turn them into that. Like, it's one of those, again, like a weird band that just knows how to do it because they just tried something different and became kind of a staple of their sound. And I will say, I do think maybe this latches a little too firmly on to the power pop sort of 80s thing versus maybe some of the more heavy tracks. I think some of the heavier tracks in here were probably the most dynamic. The poppy tracks, while good and just constructed efficiently, I guess you could say, they don't remain very memorable. Like songs like Wish Me Dead and Taken by Surprise and Slither Away, they're good, but they're kind of just there. And when they're put up against like another track that I think is far stronger, they kind of just like disappear. Again, like whittling this down.
So let us get down to business. I'm gonna give this album, I was kind of teetering. I'm gonna say 3 out of 5. Originally I was gonna say 2.5 out of 5. Here's what I would have done. I would have cut some of these songs out, and I would have added a few more guitar solos or some heavier parts for variation. I could tell this was a melody-driven album with hooks in mind. That being said, there were some hooks that were good. All over this album there were hooks that were good, but I think maybe it went to the well too much with the hooks, and that's where it kind of went awry for me. However, there's nothing really I can fault this album for other than that. So I think 3 out of 5 is a very fair score, and I'm gonna stick with that.
It's a 2.5. It's an okay album. I think it does hang on to one particular mode, and all right, I love CKY. Like, I still go back to those albums frequently. They're very fun. They're very interesting. This is kind of missing the variety that those albums had. Now, granted, there is like one particular uniform sound that they definitely have, but there's more variety within it. This kind of latches onto one particular mode and still brings back one of the main things I like about CKY, but it doesn't feel like it has enough of an adventure with it, because, you know, I think the songs in CKY were a little bit more themed for different moods and such. This kind of hangs on to like the big poppy mood most of the time. Now, I do think there's some really killer songs in here, like Bloodstock Mania, Vaudeville's Revenge, Condition Unconditional. There's a lot of killer fucking riffs in there, a lot of killer melodies. I just think, I don't know, maybe this was just too condensed sometimes. And I hate like saying that this has to be like CKY because this is a separate entity, even though it has one of the founding members in it. But inevitably, it's hard not to compare the two. In a way, I think it's good that it doesn't sound exactly like CKY, but at the same time, it's hard not to compare the two because, again, they share like a founding member and they do kind of have that signature sound. I do also take issue with the fact that the vocals are way too processed. I don't think Deron has necessarily a bad voice at all. I just think he's maybe as in love with guitar effects as he is vocal effects, and I think he kind of went ham on the vocal effects in here. Overall, though, I mean, this was still pretty enjoyable. I still recommend checking it out. I haven't jammed their first album, so I don't know what their first album's like, but I definitely jammed a fuck ton of CKY, and I certainly recommend that band as well. But yeah, definitely check this out. This was a fun listen. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is in there, as well as our store. We do have shirts. We are out of extra large shirts. We will eventually restock and eventually have some new merch in there. We're still kind of testing out different shit there. And we also have audio versions of some of our episodes in there in case you would rather hear us than look at us.
Which is not an uncommon thing.
Yeah, it's at the filter kind of helps. Not really.
We're actually the lizard people that Alex Jones talks about.
Don't let them find the hatchlings. I mean, children.
We must end this communication quickly.
And of course, thank you all so much for liking, subscribing, following, all that stuff. It is absolutely amazing to see this channel grow. We are close to 13,000 subscribers. That is absolutely fucking insane and well beyond any expectations I ever had for this channel, ever. Yeah, this is just fucking mind-blowing, and you guys are the reason that we're growing, and it's just absolutely fucking amazing. I can't thank you enough. Yet here I am thanking you because this is that part of the video. And we will continue to thank you. Oh, yeah. We will thank the hell out of you. Thank you right in your thank hole. Right in the... Ooh, thank you. You're welcome. So that was hella awkward. But anyway, thank you all once again, and we will catch you later.